Hello, and welcome to this week's video where we're going to be doing an HTMA case study for helping a young woman to overcome fatigue and autoimmunity. I'm Jennifer Ellis Schutz, chronic illness and complex PTSD warrior, functional health practitioner, transformational coach, and founder of Wellness Code Academy.
And I'm Sarah Korzeniewski, registered dietitian, functional practitioner, transformational coach, and founder of The Organic Dietitian.
All right, great. So let's dig in. And just to let you know, we're offering this video today to give our viewers a window look into what it's like to interpret and implement the HTMA into one's practice in a real world scenario. And in doing this, I'm going to be facilitating, interviewing Sarah about one of her more recent clients so that it's actually literally hands-on experience that you're getting here. So let's just jump right in. So Sarah, please give us the general information and an overview of the history of this client.
Yeah, so this is a female client. She is in her late 20s. She is single, but in a serious relationship. And she was given the diagnoses of Hashimoto's before coming to seek out some support.
Is that the only diagnosis she received? Are there any others?
Well, diagnosis-wise, that was what she was given, but she does have a long list of health complaints that she has been trying to navigate.
And please tell us what those complaints are.
Sure. So she doesn't feel like herself, I'm sure, as a lot of people tend to feel, but she's struggling with very low energy, weight gain, and struggling to lose weight, anxiety and rumination. She also has no libido, muscle tension and pain. She deals with chronic dandruff as well as eczema, which we know is another autoimmune condition. She struggles with irregular periods, and her periods are continuing to kind of change for the not better. Slow hair growth, hair loss. She deals with acid reflux as well as bloating, acne, and fluid retention. So quite the list of things, which probably is a little bit more the norm than the exception these days. I'm sure you would agree with that.
Yeah, and she's so young, so she's definitely landed in the right place, and I'm confident that you'll be able to help her turn things around. So what are some of the things that she has tried to date to help herself with either little or no successful results?
Yeah. Well, she started to really feel unwell back in 2019. So since then, she has actually tried anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication, which actually made her feel worse. She took that for about 2.5 years, and it actually contributed to more weight gain, more decreased libido, and lowering of her energy even more. She did see a holistic nutritionist, which ran labs. They did a genetic test, and this person made recommendations just based on her genetic test. Also made some food recommendations based on her genetic test and supplements, which she says helped very little. She sought out an acupuncturist, which she said helped a little, but felt more temporary. She did physical therapy. She does a very intense scalp care routine with various amounts of topical products. She does topical lotion for her eczema, and she has kind of tweaked her diet a little bit.
All right, great. And what is there anything else that she's currently doing now as part of her self-care healing protocol?
Well, she did list various supplements. There's about a dozen here, so I'm not going to go over them in detail, but it does include things like fish oil, magnesium, some vitamin D and vitamin K, and some digestive supports, which tend to be, again, pretty common for many people to take. So might be helpful to know those things. And she really doesn't have as much of a self-care routine. She is seeing a therapist on a regular basis, but occasional meditation, occasional journaling, but not very consistent with those things.
Gotcha. And based on what she has shared with you about her daily living routine, were you able to identify any factors in her life that are likely serving as stressors and perpetuating her current chronic health challenges?
Yes. Well, I always ask about their sleep habits. And so she does report staying up pretty consistently till 2 a.m. on most nights and will sleep in until 9 a.m. and then get up and jump right in onto her computer to start her day. She does list quite a few traumas that, we know can kind of accumulate into the perfect storm of many factors. So I won't list all of them here. But some top ones are her parents did get a divorce. And so she does kind of have a bit of a traumatic family dynamic that she deals with. And that can be very triggering for her as well. She does kind of get regular vaccines. She's gotten the flu shot last couple years, and she did get the, I won't say it.
The more recent vaccine. Okay.
Vaccine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she has that. She has been on birth control in the past. Again, stopped around 2019, but she was on it for about 5 years or so. So yeah, those were kind of the big things that stood out for me. She does mention a lot of her stressors include her job. She does have a heavy workload. She doesn't feel that she has a lot of time to do like movement that she wants to do. She chronically ruminates, so she acknowledges the fact that she doesn't really have a great self-care and stress management routine and tends to spend a lot of time on social media.
As seems to be par for the course for many people these days. And when you asked her the infamous question that I taught you to ask all your clients, what she intuitively feels she needs the most in order to find her way back to health and wholeness, what was her response?
Yes, and this is always a very interesting response to hear from people, but hers, she feels she needs more self-love. She needs to trust in herself that she can do hard things. She needs to be less afraid of change. She needs to exercise more. She needs to adjust her circadian rhythm, and she needs to tweak her diet as needed.
Well, those are all some pretty excellent things to cultivate awareness of, and certainly a process to implementing those into one's life, which once again, I'm confident that you're going to be able to help her do that through some awesome transformational coaching skills that you're going to bring to the table in your work with her. So is there anything else that you feel it would be helpful for the viewers to know about this client before we share the screen and reveal the HTMA results and how they correlate with her history and current challenges?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I always like to ask them what they expect to walk away with or what they want to walk away with and knowing or having. And she mentioned the understanding how the mind and body are intertwined and how she can support that, because I know that's something that you and I promote very significantly, and kind of going beyond just the biochemical and being able to, support both mind and body. She wanted a high level interpretation of her case and general thoughts on a roadmap for her healing journey, feeling more hopeful about her health journey and her ability to heal herself, knowing that it's up to her, and being able to stick to habits, like being able to uncover what are the root causes of why it's so hard to stick to habits. Because it's easy for us to think we can just tell someone what to do and give them a protocol. And here's a list of, yeah, you need to meditate and you need, like, she knows that she needs this stuff, but she struggles with sticking to these habits. And so that's important to really understand, and action steps that she can take to get started on her healing journey.
Awesome. Well, what do you say you share your screen so that we can take a look at the HTMA and see the correlations between her struggles and what the HTMA reveals about what's going on in her body in terms of both physiology and psychology.
Yep. All right. I am presenting. Let me see. Do you see this?
Yep, I do.
All right. So we're just going to go through case study. So here is her first HTMA test.
All right. So awesome. So let's start by you sharing with us what you see in the first section of the HTMA in regards to what she has shared with you about what she's struggling with.
Well, what I like to do when I first get the HTMA is to check out what we call the first 4 minerals here. So these are the primary 4 minerals: calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. These are kind of the most critical because you don't want to bombard people with trying to fix every single marker that you see right out of the gate, right? That ends up with the supplement overload, that supplement PTSD. And the 4 main minerals are really going to affect so many things in the body and affect your ability to kind of balance the rest of them out. So that's really what I look at first. And just by looking at this, I automatically see that 3 out of those 4 are showing up below normal ranges. So this is what we call in the HTMA world a 3 lows pattern, which is very similar to a 4 lows pattern. But we are seeing some low levels here, and that can tell us a lot about, again, not only their physical body, but their psychological aspect. This is chronic long-term stress. This is burnout, right? This is someone has been burning the candle at both ends, likely for a long period of time, but also knowing that stress can be from within as well. It's not always just about, our schedule and being busy and things like that, right? Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree. And so this highly correlates with chronic fatigue, which is one of her main complaints. And as I have taught in the Wellness Code training program, that chronic disease begins with reduced cellular energy, not so much inflammation, because when our cells lack the energy to do their jobs, inflammation is the byproduct of that. And when we're in a chronic state of low energy and chronic inflammation, well, that's where we're going to become a vulnerable host to diagnoses such as autoimmunity and the list of so many more: fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, whatever. And what can you tell us about that jacked up level of magnesium in regards to this client? Like, what's up with that? Why is the magnesium so high?
Well, magnesium gets burned during stress, so it is always possible that, stress is kind of causing that. But when we look at the hair is coming out of you. It's a soft tissue, right? So this test cannot be interpreted as is. So a lot of times people might look at this and say, oh, she's got abundant amounts of magnesium within her body. And remember, this is helping us to assess what's going on at the cellular level. So hair and looking at soft tissue isn't necessarily looking at the cell nutrients, but it's helping us to be able to assess what's going on in the cell. So if nutrients are coming out of your hair like that, then that is generally a sign that it's not going into the cell and staying into the cell like it should. So high levels are what often we call, especially with magnesium, more biounavailable magnesium. So it's in the body, but we're not utilizing it properly. So we're not really reaping the benefits of it. So one thing we might consider is stress levels. The other thing that we would consider is that she is taking magnesium, as a lot of people do. And that is, people talk a lot about how magnesium is such an important mineral, and it is, no doubt. And so they start taking it without realizing that there's cofactors that need to go along with magnesium to make sure that it actually does get into the cell. So this in part could be also a reflection of her taking magnesium, but not having the appropriate cofactors to help it get into the cell, which is why we need to look at all nutrients, and they work together. They don't work in isolation. So that could be a consideration. The other factor that I think of is we look at her mercury level here, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later, but she has some mercury showing up here. And mercury, part of the negative effect of mercury is it can start to kind of waste other nutrients and kind of push them, out of the cells. And magnesium is one of them. So is that in part, contributing to it? So there's many factors that we want to consider. And this is where also kind of having her history is playing a big role, but also looking at the context of everything going on and kind of all possibilities.
Awesome. And while we can't possibly, for time constraint issues, go into every single point and remarkable factor in these first two sections, which is the absolute value section and the toxic element section, what would be, one, two, possibly three other remarkable findings that would be helpful for the viewers to be made aware of in these first two sections?
Well, with this one, the thing that pops up into my head is the fact that her copper is pretty low and her zinc is really, again, super high there. This does not necessarily mean that she has too much zinc in her body. It is possible. There's a lot of reasons why zinc can be elevated. Again, it could be a loss. So it's coming out of her. So she's still technically deficient in it because it's not doing what it's designed to do, where it's designed to do it. Sometimes these people, maybe have used dandruff shampoo, and knowing that she complains of dandruff, this is something we need to consider. And I always ask clients to tell me what products they're using, beauty products. So I ask them to list brands of makeup and shampoo and, all of these things. And she's using stuff for dandruff, but I didn't find any products that did contain zinc. But then this is also a great opportunity to make sure you ask clients, because they don't always tell you everything that they're using. But to our knowledge, we can't find any reason outside of why her zinc might be high. So again, mercury can also kind of displace zinc. So that could be pushing it high. Or she could also be dealing with some hidden copper issues. She was on birth control for 5 years. She is under an immense amount of stress, which can impact our ability to kind of regulate minerals, including zinc and copper. So she could be dealing with some hidden copper issues, and that can be playing with zinc. So again, many different factors. We can't just take this at face value. We got to be good detectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, would you say that a 3 lows pattern with calcium, magnesium, and sodium, in her case being the 3 low minerals, highly correlates with unresolved trauma, as well as a jack magnesium indicating, a stress system?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I would also even say that some of these markers are also pointing to digestive issues. Her phosphorus is a bit low too, and overall minerals being low. Stress definitely can play a role, but it's like, even if she is what's her diet like? She's avoiding gluten, but she's really, she's still eating grains, and, she doesn't really limit herself all that much. So we definitely want to take a look at that too and make sure she's eating to reduce inflammation for her specifically. But, the gut likely playing a bit of a role too. That's also preventing her from properly breaking down her food and absorbing. And they both, that trauma aspect, obviously, and the stress aspect and the gut aspect, those are going to be very intertwined.
100%. So now let's shift gears and go over to the significant ratios. If you could circle that around your cursor so people know what we're looking at. And this is the section, while all sections are important and reveal essential information and helping us to help a client to become their own best self-healers, the significant ratios is by far the most significant section to pay attention to. So Sarah, what does the significant ratios section in regards to this client reveal to you about her?
All right. Well, a lot. So her calcium to phosphorus ratio, here's the first one. This is showing up low. So, this is really talking about the autonomic nervous system. Now, Again, we don't want to ever just interpret a lab. We've got to take the client into account too. But this is really showing us that she's spending more time in sympathetic dominance. So more of a fight or flight type state. She's probably, again, has a hard time slowing down, resting. She's also then causing her to burn through her nutrients much more quickly, which is partly, what's kind of causing some of these lows as well. So she's kind of driving her car with her foot on her gas at the moment, right? But we can't just stop there. We've got to look at others. So this sodium to potassium ratio, this is what they call the vitality ratio. It's also known as a stress ratio or kind of life or death ratio. And this, though, is showing really low. So this to us tells us, though, she's in burnout mode. She's, got very low vitality. And so because she's kind of stuck in sympathetic, yet has low vitality, this kind of tells us that she's really trying to drive, her foot's on the gas, but her body's trying to brake, because it's like, I can't keep going at this rate. You need to slow down. So I'm going to try to force you to slow down. And so I'm going to do that in any way I can. Right.
I tend to describe it to my clients doing donuts in a car in a parking lot that's been recently snowed upon. They've got like their foot on the accelerator and the brakes at the same time and jacking the wheel, to one side or the other. And the car is just going, woo, spinning.
Mm-hmm. So she's actually showing a lot of signs of parasympathetic dominance, too, when we're looking at it in the appropriate ways. So this is things to bring up to her and to really dive deep into, the psychological aspect and into kind of her life and how she can start really giving her body rest and slowing down and all of those things.
And what are some ways that parasympathetic dominance shows up in one's life? For instance, shut down, freeze, people pleasing, just acquiescing, giving up, saying, okay, whatever, I'll just go along with it, not asserting oneself. Are there any other ways that you see parasympathetic dominance showing up for clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all that. It's like the everybody else is more important, my job has got to be number one, everything's more important, and they fall off the list of important things to focus on.
Yeah, and they just overall feel powerless to change their circumstances, so they just give in, kind of like a relinquishing to circumstances that make them feel powerless. Okay, and so what does the next ratio, the calcium and potassium, tell us about this client?
So calcium and potassium does give us a bit of a window into the thyroid, which is interesting because, again, remember, she has been told she's got Hashimoto's. And so, there could be obviously some thyroid component there. But with this being low, it's showing more hyperthyroidism. So that is kind of the opposite of typically what Hashimoto's is. But this is where we, again, have to know what we're looking at, and knowing too that thyroid hormone it's all about what's happening in the cell. So when we test thyroid hormones in the blood, that's only telling us what's in the blood, not what's in the cell. And minerals in part help hormones like thyroid hormone get into the cell. So sometimes I find that blood presentation and HTMA presentation can be different. Sometimes HTMA is an early warning sign of like what's to come. You would also want to ask if this person is on thyroid medication, maybe they're, taking too much or, something like that. She is not on any thyroid medication or anything at this moment. But, these are all things that we want to be able to ask.
And I would also add that just because someone has a diagnosis of Hashimoto's doesn't mean that their thyroid can't be toggling between sluggish and hyper, because that can often happen with either, hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism. You can kind of be on a roller coaster. All right. And the zinc to copper, what correlations can be made there?
Well, so zinc to copper, again, we saw that in just the single nutrients here, but by this being really elevated, It could be, there is always a possibility that someone is truly deficient in copper. I personally find that to be more rare. I've never really found myself putting anybody on copper, and maybe that's partly because, you know, I do work with mostly women, and, you know, a lot of the women I work with have been on birth control, and we know that that can affect copper among other things. You know, we're under a lot of stress, it's getting passed along in utero, there's various reasons why we can have more copper. But stress is also, you know, causing that zinc deficiency. So it doesn't always guarantee that there is a copper deficiency. Oftentimes, what I tend to find it more points to is hidden copper, kind of what we call toxicities or biounavailability, and zinc deficiency. And that to me makes sense because dandruff, that's one reason why they put zinc in dandruff shampoos, right? Is because, you know, we do find that maybe there is some correlation there between deficiencies and dandruff. So that would be, you know, something interesting to talk to her about. But we want to make sure that we're being really cautious with our recommendations. Again, talking about what makes sense.
Absolutely. And what can you tell us about the next three ratios? We have sodium to magnesium, calcium to magnesium, and iron to copper. So what can you tell us about the sodium to magnesium?
So sodium to magnesium is what we call our adrenal ratio. So just based on this, we can always say, yep, adrenals are probably tanked, you know,
Which
again,
is really just an overall tanked HPA, hypothalamus
right,
pituitary adrenal axis, and
right.
obviously chronic cell danger response.
Correct. Yeah. And this is again where we don't want to just say, hey, let's get you on some supplements to help boost your cortisol and support your adrenals. Like, because minerals can be supportive, but they're not going to really do much for us if the reasons for the stressors have not been addressed.
Exactly.
And so again, this is another marker that we can look at to say, well, yeah, it's showing she's kind of in sympathetic, but this is, you know, her body trying to slow things down.
Mm-hmm. And how about that calcium to magnesium? Super, super low
Calcium.
there.
Yep. This one is her blood sugar ratio. And this is actually something she's not surprised at because she has suspected for a long time that she struggled blood sugar balance. So by this being low, it shows us that she probably tends to have a lot of blood sugar spikes, but as we know, what goes up must come down. So she's probably spending a lot of time on the blood sugar roller coaster, which, so we want to definitely check in with not only her nutrition, but we know everything can affect blood sugar. So she still has to do all of that deep work in all areas, getting better sleep and, you know, healthy relationships and, you know, hydration and everything to really help to get that blood sugar back into balance, because also a jacked blood sugar is not going to do her gut any favors. So gut
Or her
healing,
nervous system.
yeah,
Like everything impacts blood sugar, and blood sugar impacts everything. So it becomes a vicious kind of figure eight where someone gets caught in that cycle. And lastly, we have the iron to copper. What does that reveal?
So the iron to copper ratio, we consider it an infection ratio, and hers, that's actually the only marker that's showing, again, quote unquote normal. But this can sometimes, you know, help to assess, you know, the immune system a little bit if they're more prone to bacterial or viral infections, things like that. But again, we're not going to look at that and be like, oh, you have no issues with that. It's perfect because this marker is perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And look at that toxic ratio section. What do we want to see in that section? And what does that section tell us about her in regards to
Yeah.
what we see here?
So this ratio is the balance between minerals and metals. And because of that, we want these bars to be as high as possible because that means you have more mineral and less metal. And because these numbers are starting to drop, this really means that, you know, in particular for her right now, this mercury and this mercury could be a current exposure. You know, she does get vaccines, you know. We would want to ask if she's got fillings. Does she eat a lot of fish? And this could even just be something that has been passed on from the environment, you know, in utero. And just because none of these other metals are high doesn't mean they're not there. You know, again, when we're under a lot of stress, we tend to not eliminate toxins all that well. So they could be there, and they probably are there to some degree, I would bet. but the body isn't strong enough to get rid of them. So we can't, discertain that she doesn't have any of those others. But what we're seeing here is that this mercury is interfering with her ability to properly absorb and utilize some of these precious metals. And this is why
nutrients, you mean nutrient minerals.
And this doesn't mean we put her on some sort of harsh detox, or she goes on like a, juice cleanse, or I don't know,
or a chelation protocol,
or IV,
right.
Whatever. We've got to address her minerals first, but we also have to address her nervous system. We've got her eating to reduce inflammation. We've got to support her circadian rhythm, like all of those things, because if those are not well, like, nervous system dysregulation causes downregulation of her detox systems. So she's going to struggle with that. So we got to work on a lot of other things first before, we can necessarily even jump into, something like that. So keeping those things in mind when we're presenting strategies.
Yeah, and I would just look at this, and with those low toxic ratio values and being a 3 low patterns, and seeing how, tanked her HPA, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and her vitality ratio is, and that mercury level, I would say her detox pathways are severely compromised right now, and she is accumulating more toxins, with toxic metals being, a big driver of autoimmunity, then she is getting rid of them. And so there's a lot of healing opportunities available here that don't necessarily involve more supplements.
Right.
Okay. And what else can you tell us about what we're seeing on this screen about any of the other sections?
The additional element section here, sometimes we'll see some higher levels of metals. Again, we've got to focus on other things first. One thing that I would point out to her is that her lithium levels are pretty low. So these 2 arrows mean that it was too low for the lab to detect, and especially dealing with more anxiety and depression, then that's something to be of interest. But also lithium does, in part, is a nutrient that can help with kind of detoxification to some degree. So that might be something to, consider when suggesting strategies.
Yeah, a low dose of lithium orotate sublingual could really help with the anxiety and depression. While it's not addressing the root causes, it could give her some well-needed symptom relief and help her become more adherent to self-care routines.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and so based on all of this and considering the client's history and current challenges, where would you start in terms of some practical, manageable, non-overwhelming action steps to present as suggestions to get things started towards helping her become her own best self-healer?
Yeah. So the 3 top things that come to mind, because we want to keep it small for people, we don't want to give them lists of, a dozen things to do, would be to discuss a few ideas for starting to support her nervous system, in an easy way. And there's tons of tools out there. You've taught me GOBS in the Wellness Code Academy, and we're going to present some in the Holistic HTMA Pro program. But maybe, and this is why I don't like to, and I know you don't either, tell clients, here's what you need to do, right? It's okay, here's what we're seeing about the nervous system. Here's the history you've given me. Does this make sense to you? Does this resonate with you? And that's what I always I constantly am asking clients when I'm talking to them, like, does this resonate with you? Even going over this and talking about symptoms, like, do you feel burnt out? Does that word resonate with you? Right. And so I might present, maybe 3 at the most ideas for, ways to support her nervous system. What feels good to you? Or, maybe you try a couple of them out and see which ones, you feel good about, whether it be breath work, whether it be meditation, any of those types of things. And try to even start with just small amounts. Don't recommend a 30-minute meditation right out of the gate. I would definitely want to start getting her, supporting her circadian rhythm. So we would need to start having conversations of how she can start getting to bed earlier. Now, going to bed at 2 a.m., explaining to her that most of our healing, or a lot of our healing, happens between 10 and 2. So she's missing out on all of that healing potential.
And the hours of sleep before midnight are of the most critical.
Right. And, get them to see that. And, have her present me ideas, well, obviously you're not going to go from 2 a.m. to 10.
No.
But even if you were to just get to bed 15 minutes earlier, half hour early max, what would it take for you to do that? What needs to happen for you to do that versus us sitting here saying, here's what you need to do. Right. Talking about, is she on her phone at night before bed? Is she watching TV? Is she getting exposed to that blue light? Like all of those, deep conversations. So how can we start working towards that? And then I think the other really important thing would be diet, because we're seeing some stuff with gut. She has symptoms of gut. We know she has autoimmunity, which is totally gut. And she needs to support blood sugar balance, which goes with diet too. So how can she start working on trying to figure out what eating to reduce inflammation looks like for her and blood sugar balance? So you kind of got to assess where the client is at. You're not always going to say, you need to completely dramatically change everything right now unless they're open to that. And you also can't say, here's the way that you need to eat, because we can't know that as a practitioner. It's going to be 100% bio individual. So, looking at what her diet is already like. And I also now typically will ask clients, where do you feel like you want to start with diet? Do we start with just 1 or 2 small changes, or are you ready? Do you feel like you want to kind of jump in? And they'll let me know. And then we can kind of go from there. And then, we might present a couple of options, ideas, what sounds good to you, what resonates, where do you want to start, knowing that we can tweak things along the way. Maybe even having her start checking blood sugar so that she can kind of better see what's going on there. And, off she goes.
And I would just interject that typically now, for nervous system regulation tools, I almost always start with a simple some breathing tools to start with. And I say that because the breath is literally a master signal of whether the nervous system perceives us to be in a state of threat versus safety. And there's just so many simple breathing tools that people can weave into their daily routines without adding any overwhelm, yet the payoff of them is immense. So that's typically my go-to. And also, as you know, Sarah, you have the circadian rhythm reset checklist. You can always present her that checklist and say, look, ideally, it'd be great if you could check all of these off. But how about you just take this checklist and you start wherever you want. You just pick one thing to check off. And then you keep this checklist available. And when you're ready, you can check another one off. And if you ever reach a point where you have them all checked off, I can almost guarantee you'll be sleeping like a newborn baby that sleeps well through the night, and it will have massive, awesome payoffs in your health in the long run. That combined with breathing tools and dialing in on eating to reduce inflammation sounds really good. Are there any supplements that you would recommend to her at this juncture other than the low dose of sublingual lithium orotate that I brought up earlier?
Well, yeah, I always do like to have some just general, mineral of some kind of multi-mineral of some kind. There's lots of different ones out there. So we'll use energy testing to determine which option and what dose might be good for her. I usually like to do some sort of like adrenal cocktail, whether they want to make them themselves, which we have recipes to provide them if they want to do that, which is typically more cost effective. Or there are, Jigsaw makes a good non-sugar added, non-junky that has sodium, potassium, and whole food vitamin C in it, which is important. So I would probably start her on that. And then thinking about something for calcium. Depending on if someone tolerates dairy, that might be an option. Otherwise, Again, trying to utilize whole food forms as much as possible, because nature created foods to have the right balance of nutrients.
So like bone matrix from
Yeah.
Heart and Soil.
Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when we start to provide people with supplements that are man-made and have started to kind of now single out nutrients, we kind of we're playing against Mother Nature. So we do want to try to do that as much as possible. And then I always kind of like to start them, in someone in this case, at least with like topical magnesium. So whether they want to do magnesium flake baths, which might kind of also provide a little more self-care, kind of force her to relax a little bit, or, you know, some sort of lotion spray, things like that. Those would kind of at least be the bases that we would start with, I think.
Yeah, awesome. Is there anything else that you can think about adding about this client or the self-healing game plan moving forward?
I mean, well, we might sort of think about something for supporting just like that mercury level, again, whether it's, you know, a strategically used binder, or I also just love I love tools whenever possible versus supplements. So, you know, we could start thinking about some sort of detox tool to kind of get her on, you know, to start opening up detox pathways and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So like some rebounding, some dry skin brushing, some self-lymphatic massage, but overall, you'd say just the overall holistic approach, a whole person, whole system approach is really the best way to support detox. Yep. Versus taking specific things to bind and chelate, where those have a time and a place, but we need to look at it in terms of fixing the whole picture.
Right.
Nothing in isolation.
Yeah, HTMA is not a fast fix.
No, it's not.
Nothing is. It's layers and doing things, you know, step by step. You got to support the body's ability to do what it's naturally designed to do.
Yeah, and I always go back is that, you know, most chronic diseases are caused by stress, and most stress is caused by a lack of self-care. Mm-hmm. And so just by upregulating self-care, we shift the trajectory of our health and our life immensely.
Well, and then what's the reason for lack of self-care? Trauma
and all that.
They don't value, people don't value, they don't value themselves, right? They're people pleasers, so everybody else is more important than them. They struggle to, you know, invest time in it. If we don't feel we're worth any amount of time, energy, resources is going to seem too expensive.
Yeah. All right. So, Sarah, what can you say to wrap this case study up in regards to just an overall holistic approach to interpreting and implementing the HTMA, and where can they learn a trauma-informed interpretation of the HTMA through the lens of psychoneuroimmunology?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is HTMA, we cannot just do one session and give you an HTMA test result and tell, you know, people everything that they need to know to be able to move through their own healing journey. And this is about co-creating. This is about working with clients. So we want to be able to teach people ways of empowering their clients, helping them to become their own best self-healer, and giving them the power to take back, you know, their own health, so that we can not just teach them to fish and do it for them, or that we're not just fishing for them, but we're rather teaching them to fish so that they can continue on. And, you know, being able to do that, hopefully this showed people what the potential is of being able to utilize the HTMA when we look at it properly as that coaching tool to help get clients kind of buy in and really help to be able to provide more recommendations that they can be a part of. And that's why we created the Holistic HTMA Pro course, in order to teach people how to interpret the HTMA and use it, not just interpret, but utilize it via the lens of psychoneuroimmunology, using a truly holistic mind, body, spirit approach.
Absolutely. And if this intrigues you and you would like to learn how to interpret and implement the HTMA, as we showed you that we do in our practices and our work with our clients today in this video, well, then, as Sarah said, we created the Holistic HTMA Pro. We're going to be we're going to be rolling out, not unrolling, rolling out the beta immersion program of it starting this September 13th, 2023. And then we'll be turning it into a self-paced pre-recorded course after that. If this intrigues you and you'd like to be part of that beta training, now's the time, because we're going to be offering it at a one-time only low price that will never be offered again. And you can find out more by checking out the links below this video. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you glean some useful pearls of wisdom from today's case study, as well as some inspiration and motivation to apply to your own healing journey and your work with clients. Anything else, Sarah?
That's it.
Okay. Thanks so much. And until next week, cheers to your healing, resilience, and personal and professional success.